Serena is my choice, my life. Vincent Caldwell's voice thunders, defying a room of shocked elites as he grips his guitar and the hand of the woman he loves, ready to abandon his billionaire legacy. Welcome, listeners. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and let us know. New York, London, or maybe a cozy town like Vincent's future home? What do you think happens when a man bound by family expectations meets a woman who sets his soul free? Will love conquer prejudice, or will betrayal tear them apart? Stick around to unravel this electrifying tale of music, defiance, and unbreakable bonds. Don't miss a single chapter. Hit that subscribe button for our latest stories and share where you're watching from. Can Vincent and Serena rewrite their destiny? Let's find out together. The rain-slicked streets of Manhattan gleamed under the sodium glow of streetlights, a city that never slept, but always judged. Vincent Caldwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, 60 stories above the chaos. His reflection, a ghost in the glass. At 30, he was the heir to the Caldwell real estate empire, a name that opened doors and chained them shut in equal measure. His life was a meticulously crafted prison, each moment scripted by the expectations of a family, whose wealth was as old as the city itself. The skyline stretched before him, gleaming towers of glass and steel, each one a monument to his family's legacy, each one a shackle around his soul. Vincent's fingers twitched, aching for the weight of his cherry-red Gibson Les Paul, the one secret he guarded like a fugitive heart. His grandmother, Margaret Caldwell, was the architect of his confinement. A woman of 72 with eyes like winter frost, she ruled the family with the precision of a general and the venom of a viper. Her voice could cut through a boardroom or a soul with equal ease, and Vincent had felt its edge too many times. "You are a Caldwell," she'd hiss whenever he dared stray from her vision. "Act like one." A single misstep, a late arrival to a gala, a casual word to the wrong investor, unleashed her wrath, her words slicing deeper than any blade. She didn't just demand perfection, she demanded his erasure, molding him into a vessel for the family name, not a man with dreams of his own. Vincent's childhood had been no kinder. While other boys climbed trees or chased friendships, he was sequestered in the Caldwell estate's library, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and tutors who smelled of starch and disapproval. Friends were a luxury he couldn't afford. Margaret deemed them distractions, potential leaks to a press eager for scandal. "You're not like other children," she'd told him at 8, her hand heavy on his shoulder as he stared longingly at a playground beyond the estate's iron gates. "You're a legacy." So he studied economics, finance, the art of negotiation, until his eyes burned and his heart shrank. By 16, he could recite market trends but couldn't name a single person who'd laugh at his jokes. Yet beneath this suffocating discipline, a rebellion simmered. It began with a battered second-hand guitar he found at a flea market during a rare, unsupervised outing at 17. The vendor, an old man with hands like weathered oak, had winked and said, "This one's got stories to tell, kid." Vincent hid it in a closet, behind tailored suits and expectations, teaching himself chords from grainy online videos late at night. The electric guitar was his defiance, its wail a voice for the dreams he wasn't allowed to speak. Each strum was a small act of treason against the Caldwell name, a spark in the dark of his controlled existence. He started sneaking out at 20, slipping past security to play at dive bars in Brooklyn under the alias Vince Carter. The OBB name was a shield, letting him shed the billionaire air for a few hours and become a man who lived for the music. In those smoky, dimly lit rooms, he wasn't Vincent Caldwell, heir to billions. He was Vince, a guitarist whose riffs could make a crowd sway and shout. The bars, places like the Rusty Note or the Drunk Fiddle, were worlds apart from the polished boardrooms of Caldwell Enterprises. Graffiti-stained walls, sticky floors, and the scent of cheap whiskey felt like home in a way his penthouse never could. But every performance was a gamble. Margaret had eyes everywhere, drivers, assistants, even the doorman who nodded a little too knowingly. Discovery meant ruin, the guitar confiscated, his freedom further curtailed. Tonight, Vincent stood, In his penthouse, the city's pulse mocking his own, he'd just endured another of Margaret's lectures, her voice sharp over the phone as she criticized his distracted demeanor at a recent investor meeting. "You're not a poet, Vincent," she'd snapped. "You're a Caldwell. Focus." He clenched his fists, the calluses on his fingers a reminder of the life he hid. Tomorrow he'd play at the Rusty Note, a gig he'd booked weeks ago under the bar's flickering neon sign. The thought sent a thrill through him, laced with dread. What if someone recognized him? What if Margaret's spies followed? He pushed the fear down, his hand brushing the hidden case where his Gibson waited. Music was his oxygen, and he'd risk everything for one more breath. Vincent's life was a tightrope, each step a calculation to avoid Margaret's wrath. He attended galas in bespoke tuxedos, smiled for cameras, and signed deals that added zeros to the family fortune. But his heart was elsewhere. In his mind, he was on a stage, fingers blistering as he played for a crowd that didn't care about his last name. He dreamed of a life where he could be Vince Carter forever, not a Caldwell, but a man who chose his path. Yet, the weight of legacy was relentless. Margaret had already begun pressuring him to marry someone suitable, a senator's daughter or an heiress with a pedigree as polished as her own. The thought made his stomach churn. Love, to Margaret, was a contract, not a feeling. As he stared out at the city, a memory flickered. His first performance 2 years ago, at a bar so small the stage was just a corner with a frayed rug. He'd been terrified, his hands shaking. But when he struck the first chord, the fear dissolved. The crowd's cheers had filled a void he hadn't known existed. Since then, he'd chased that feeling, each gig a rebellion against the life he was born into. Tomorrow's performance at the Rusty Note felt different, though. Something in the air, a restless energy, whispered of change. Vincent couldn't name it, but it stirred his blood, like the moment before a storm breaks. He turned from the window, crossing the penthouse to the closet where his guitar hid. Opening the case, he ran his fingers over the Gibson's curves, its red finish gleaming like a promise. Tomorrow he'd play Die with a Smile, a song that felt like his own heart laid bare, raw, hopeful, defiant. He didn't know that, the woman who'd change everything was already on her way, her silk dress catching the light, her laughter waiting to unravel his world. For now, Vincent Caldwell was still a prisoner of legacy, but the music in his soul was about to sing louder than ever. The Rusty Note was alive with the pulse of a Friday night, its air thick with the tang of whiskey and the hum of restless chatter. The bar, tucked in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn, was a haven for misfits, tattooed poets, weary bartenders, and dreamers who clung to the edges of the city's spotlight. The stage, a rickety platform barely raised above the sticky floor, glowed under a single flickering spotlight. Vincent Caldwell, hidden behind the alias Vince Carter, adjusted the strap of his cherry-red Gibson Les Paul, his heart pounding like a drum roll. Tonight the bar was fuller than usual, a crowd of 30 or so spilling across mismatched tables, their laughter a jagged counterpoint to the storm brewing in his chest. He'd slipped out of his Manhattan penthouse an hour ago, trading tailored suits for a worn leather jacket, his face shadowed by a baseball cap to dodge any prying eyes. This was his sanctuary, but tonight felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Vincent stepped to the mic, the crowd's buzz fading to a murmur. His fingers grazed the strings, coaxing a low electric hum that silenced the room. He'd chosen Die with a Smile by Lady Gaga and Bruno Mars, a song that felt like a confession he'd never dared speak, a raw, yearning plea for connection. As he strummed the opening chords, the notes rolled out like a tide, heavy with the weight of his hidden life. His voice, rough but soulful, carried the first lyric, and the crowd leaned in, caught in the spell. Then, halfway through the first verse, he saw her. She stood at the bar, a vision in a silk dress that shimmered like liquid midnight, catching the dim light in a way that made the room seem brighter. Serena Jackson, with her long, flowing black hair cascading over her shoulders, was a force. Elegant, yet unguarded, her presence commanding without effort. Her dark eyes sparkled with curiosity, and a faint smile played on her lips as she watched him, a glass of red wine cradled in her hand. Vincent's fingers faltered for a split second, the high guitar's wail dipping, but he caught himself, pouring the stumble into the song's raw emotion. It was as if he were playing for her alone, each lyric a thread weaving between them, stitching the space from stage to bar. Her gaze held his, steady and warm, and for the first time in years, Vincent felt seen, not as a Caldwell, not as a billionaire, but as a man with a heart that bled music. The song built to its chorus, and Vincent leaned into the mic, his voice soaring with a defiance he rarely showed the world. "If the world was ending, I'd want to be next to you," he sang, and Serena's smile widened, her head tilting as if the words were hers alone. The crowd swayed, some mouthing the lyrics, but Vincent's world had narrowed to her. The bar's grime, the risk of discovery, the weight of his family's expectations, all of it dissolved in the heat of her gaze. As the final chord rang, out, the crowd erupted, clapping and whistling, but Vincent barely heard them. He was already moving, drawn to her like a moth to a flame, his guitar still slung across his chest. He reached the bar, his pulse a wild rhythm against his ribs. "Hi," he said, voice softer than he meant, the stage's bravado replaced by a nervous edge. "I'm Vince." He extended a hand, hoping she wouldn't notice the slight tremble. Serena's laugh was warm, like sunlight breaking through. "A storm." "Serena," she replied, her handshake firm, her eyes dancing with mischief. "That was something. You made that song feel like it was written for this room." Her voice had a Brooklyn lilt, confident but kind, and Vincent felt his guard slip, a rare sensation for a man who lived behind walls. They slid into a corner booth, the crowd's noise fading to a hum as they talked. Serena was a graphic designer. Her days were spent crafting bold visuals for local brands, her nights sketching dreams she hadn't yet dared to chase. She spoke of growing up in Bed-Stuy, of a mother who taught her to paint with courage, of a world that often tried to dim her light. Vincent listened, captivated, sharing fragments of his truth, how music was his escape, how he'd always wanted to teach guitar instead of signing contracts. He didn't mention the Caldwell name, and she didn't ask, as if sensing the weight he carried. Instead, she teased him about his calloused fingers, joking that they told a better story than his tough guy leather jacket. The hours melted away, the bar emptying until only a few stragglers remained. Serena leaned closer, her silk dress brushing the table, and asked, "Why that song?" "Die with a Smile." It felt personal. Vincent hesitated, then admitted, "It's what I feel when I play, like I'm alive, but only for a moment. And I'd rather burn out smiling than live forever in silence." Her eyes softened, and she reached across the table, her fingers grazing his. "You're not as alone in that as you think," she said, and the words landed like a key turning in a lock. As the bartender called last orders, Vincent walked Serena to the door, the summer air warm and heavy outside. She turned to him, her hair catching the glow of a streetlight, and said, "You should play again next week. I'll be here." It wasn't a question but a promise, and Vincent's heart leapt. "I will," he said, grinning like a kid who'd just discovered freedom. She waved, her silhouette disappearing into the night, and Vincent stood rooted, the echo of her laughter louder than the city's roar. He walked back to his car, the Yao Gibson slung over his shoulder, feeling lighter than he had in years. Serena's face lingered in his mind, her smile, her voice, the way she'd seen the man behind the music. For the first time, Vincent dared to imagine a life where he wasn't just a Caldwell, where his guitar wasn't a secret but a spotlight. But the thrill was laced with fear. If Margaret ever learned of this night of Serena, the consequences would be swift and brutal. Yet as he drove back to Manhattan, the city lights blurring past, Vincent knew one thing with unshakable clarity. He'd be at the Rusty Note next week, playing for her, no matter the cost. The Brooklyn night was a tapestry of shadows and neon, its pulse a quiet rebellion against the polished glare of Manhattan. Vincent Caldwell, still buzzing from his encounter with Serena Jackson, found himself stealing moments from his tightly controlled life to see her again. Their first meeting at the Rusty Note had ignited something in him, a spark that refused to dim, a melody that played in his chest even as he navigated the sterile boardrooms of Caldwell Enterprises. Serena, with her radiant smile and unapologetic spirit, had become his secret, more precious than the guitar he hid from his grandmother's watchful eyes. Over the next few weeks, their romance bloomed in hidden corners, a fragile defiance against the weight of his family's expectations. Their first date was at a dimly lit diner in Bed-Stuy, its vinyl booths cracked but cozy, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried onions. Serena slid into the booth across from Vincent, her silk scarf a splash of color against her leather jacket, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders like a cascade of midnight. She teased him about his order, a plain burger, no ketchup, calling the most boring choice in New York. Vincent laughed, a sound he barely recognized, and countered by stealing a fry from her plate, earning a playful swat. They talked for hours, her stories of sketching in Prospect Park mingling with his tales of sneaking guitar lessons in high school. He didn't mention the Caldwell name, and she didn't press, as if sensing the walls he'd built around his truth. Her laughter, bright and unguarded, was a lifeline, pulling him from the suffocating grip of his legacy. Their next rendezvous was in a quiet corner of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where cherry blossoms dusted the paths like pink snow. Serena brought a sketch pad, her pencil dancing across the page to capture the curve of a petal, while Vincent sat beside her, strumming soft chords on a borrowed acoustic guitar. He played a melody he'd written the night after meeting her, a tentative, hopeful tune that rose and fell like a heartbeat. "That's beautiful," Serena murmured, her eyes on his fingers, not the page. "What's it called?" Vincent hesitated, then admitted, "It doesn't have a name yet, it's you." Her smile was a sunrise, and when she leaned over to kiss his cheek, her lips warm against his skin, Vincent felt a courage he'd never known, a desire to be more than the air his grandmother demanded. Their nights grew bolder, stolen in the shadows of the city. One evening they slipped into an underground jazz club, its basement walls vibrating with saxophone wails. Serena pulled Vincent onto the dance floor, laughing as he stumbled through the steps, his usual precision replaced by a clumsy joy. "You're hopeless," she teased, guiding his hands to her waist, her silk dress cool under his fingers. He grinned, spinning her under the flickering lights, and for a moment he wasn't Vincent Caldwell, billionaire heir, but Vince, the man who could make her laugh until her eyes sparkled. She taught him to sway to the rhythm, her body close, her breath against his ear. Each touch was a rebellion, a note in a song he was writing with his life. But the shadows held danger. Vincent knew every moment with Serena risked discovery. Margaret Caldwell's spies were everywhere, drivers who reported his movements, assistants who noted his absences. He took precautions, using cash instead of cards, parking his car blocks from their meeting spots, and never mentioning Serena's name in calls or texts. Yet the fear gnawed at him. If Margaret learned of this, she'd see Serena as a threat, a crack in the perfect facade of the Caldwell legacy. Vincent had overheard her plans to marry him to a suitable heiress, her voice cold as she discussed alliances like chess moves. The thought of losing Serena to his grandmother's wrath was a knife in his chest, but the thought of living without her was worse. One night, in Serena's cramped Bed-Stuy apartment, they lay on her couch, her head on his chest as he played, a soft riff on his guitar. Her walls were covered in her artwork, vibrant canvases of cityscapes and faces, each stroke bold and alive. "You're incredible," Vincent said, tracing the edge of a painting with his eyes. "These should be in a gallery." Serena shrugged, her voice quiet. "The world doesn't always see what's right in front of it. But you see me." She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his, and kissed him slow and deep. The kiss was a promise, a defiance of the forces that would tear them apart. Vincent pulled her closer, his heart pounding, knowing he was falling too fast, too hard. As they parted, Serena held his hand, her fingers tracing the calluses from his guitar strings. "You're different when you play," she said. "Like you're free." Vincent nodded, his throat tight. "With you, I am." He wanted to tell her everything about the Caldwell Empire, Margaret's control, the life he was born into. But the words caught, locked behind years of caution. Instead, he played her another melody, letting the music speak what he couldn't. Serena listened, her eyes closed, and Vincent knew he'd do anything to keep this feeling, this life, this love. By the time he left her apartment, the city was asleep, its silence a rare gift. Vincent walked to his car, the Gibson slung over his shoulder, his mind alive with Serena's laughter, her touch, her art. She was changing him, note by note, into a man who could imagine a future beyond his family's chains. But the shadows loomed larger now, whispering of risks he couldn't ignore. He'd return to the rusty note next week, play for her again, and pray the music would keep them safe a little longer. The Caldwell estate loomed over Manhattan's Upper East Side, like a fortress of old money, its marble facade gleaming under the October moon. Inside, the annual gala was a spectacle of excess, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across a ballroom packed with politicians, moguls, and socialites, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Vincent Caldwell stood at the edge of the crowd, his tailored tuxedo a perfect fit but a suffocating lie. Beside him, Serena Jackson was a vision in a sapphire gown that hugged her curves, its silk shimmering like a defiance of the room's sterile opulence. Her long black hair fell in waves, and her eyes, bright with both nerves and resolve, met his with a warmth that steadied his racing heart. Tonight he'd chosen to bring her into his world, to present her to the family that had caged him for 30 years. It was a declaration, a risk, a rebellion born of the love that had grown in stolen moments. Vincent's hand rested on Serena's waist as he guided her through the sea of tuxedos and gowns, feeling the weight of every stare. Whispers trailed them like smoke, curiosity, envy, judgment. He introduced her to colleagues with a pride he'd never felt for the Caldwell name, his voice steady as he said, "This is Serena Jackson, the most incredible woman I know." She smiled, her poise unshaken, shaking hands with CEOs who eyed her like an anomaly in their polished world. Vincent's chest swelled. She was his anchor, his reason to stand taller. But the air grew colder as they approached the head table, where Margaret Caldwell sat like a queen on a throne, her silver hair pinned in a severe chignon, her eyes glinting with the promise of a storm. Margaret's gaze raked over Serena, sharp and unyielding, as Vincent pulled out a chair for her. The table was a battlefield, his parents, Edward and Lillian, flanked by cousins and aunts, all extensions of Margaret's iron will. Dinner began, the clink of silverware a tense rhythm under polite conversation. Vincent tried to focus on Serena's, hand under his, her fingers a quiet reassurance, but he felt Margaret's eyes boring into him, waiting for a crack to exploit. The room's chatter faded as Margaret rose, her presence silencing the table like a guillotine's shadow. "Vincent," she began, her voice a blade wrapped in silk, "you've brought a guest tonight. Perhaps you'd care to explain why you think she belongs here." The word guest was a barb, and Vincent's jaw tightened. Serena's hand squeezed his, urging calm, but the air crackled with the inevitability of confrontation. "Serena's not just a guest," he said, his voice low but firm, rising to meet the challenge. "She's the woman I love, and she belongs wherever I am." A murmur rippled through the table, forks pausing mid-air. Serena sat straighter, her dignity a shield, but Margaret's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Love?" she said, the word dripping with disdain. "A quaint notion, Vincent, but Caldwells don't marry for love. We marry for legacy. Miss Jackson, with her modest background, is hardly suitable for the future of this family." The room seemed to shrink, the chandelier's light dimming as Margaret's words landed like blows. Vincent's blood surged, but before he could speak, she turned her gaze to Serena. You're a designer, I hear. From Brooklyn, no less. Tell me, do you think your little sketches qualify you to stand beside a Caldwell? The racism in her tone was veiled but unmistakable, a poison seeping into the silence. Serena's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady, cutting through the tension like a clear note. I don't need to qualify for anyone, Mrs. Caldwell. I'm here because Vincent chose me, and that's enough. The table froze, guests exchanging glances, some shocked, others intrigued. Vincent's heart pounded with pride, but also dread. He knew Margaret's cruelty had only begun. Margaret leaned forward, her smile a predator's baring of teeth. You're a distraction, Miss Jackson, a temporary amusement for a boy who doesn't know better. The Caldwell legacy demands more. Than a woman like you. The words were a slap, raw and deliberate, stripping away pretense. Gasps echoed, and Vincent's chair scraped back as he stood, his fists clenched, his voice a growl. Enough, grandmother, you don't get to speak to her like that. Serena is my choice, my life. The ballroom stilled, every eye on him, but Vincent saw only Serena, her face a mix of strength and pain. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising, a fire he'd never unleashed. I've lived for your approval my whole life, but no more. I'm done with your rules, your prejudice, your cage. Margaret's face paled, her composure cracking, but Vincent was already moving. He took Serena's hand, her fingers trembling, but firm in his, and strode toward a side door. The crowd parted, their whispers a storm in his wake. He led her to a storage room where his Gibson Les Paul was hidden, stashed behind crates after a paranoid arrangement with a sympathetic staff. You remember? He grabbed the guitar case, its weight a promise of freedom, and turned to Serena. We're leaving, he said, his voice raw but resolute. Together. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, held his, and she nodded, her strength mirroring his own. They pushed through the estate's grand doors, the night air sharp and cleansing. Vincent's heart raced as he gripped Serena's hand and the guitar, the symbols of his rebellion. Behind them, Margaret's voice called out, cold and commanding, You'll regret this, Vincent. But he didn't look back. The city stretched. Before them, vast and unyielding. But for the first time, Vincent felt its possibilities, not its chains. Serena squeezed his hand, her voice soft but fierce. You sure about this? He met her gaze, the fire in his chest burning brighter. I've never been more sure of anything. They stepped into the night, leaving the Caldwell legacy behind, ready to write their own. The highway stretched before Vincent Caldwell and Serena Jackson like a ribbon of possibility, its asphalt shimmering under the midnight stars as they fled Manhattan's glittering cage. Vincent's hands gripped the steering wheel, his cherry-red Gibson Les Paul secured in the back seat, a talisman of the life he was claiming. Serena sat beside him, her sapphire gown folded carefully in her lap, her long black hair catching the breeze from the open window. The city's skyline faded in the rearview mirror, its towers no longer a throne, but a tomb he'd escaped. They were bound for Hudson, a small town nestled in the Catskill Mountains, where the air smelled of pine and freedom. Vincent's heart thrummed with equal parts fear and exhilaration. Fear of the unknown, exhilaration at the woman beside him, whose quiet strength anchored his rebellion. This was their new beginning, a leap into a life unscripted by the Caldwell legacy. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine a steady counterpoint to their racing thoughts. Serena reached for Vincent's hand, her fingers warm against his calloused skin. You okay? She asked, her voice soft but piercing the silence like a note held long after the song ends. He glanced at her, her eyes reflecting the dashboard's glow, and nodded. With you, I'm more than okay. Her smile was a spark, igniting a warmth that chased away the chill of his grandmother's venomous words. Vincent had sold a chunk of his trust fund stocks, untouchable by Margaret's grasp, before they left, wiring the funds to a discreet account. It was enough to start over, to build something real. Hudson was their destination, chosen for its distance from Manhattan's reach and its promise of a simpler life. They arrived at dawn, the town waking in a haze of golden light. Hudson was a patchwork of clapboard houses, antique shops, and rolling hills, its streets alive with the murmur of a community that didn't bow to billionaires. Vincent rented a modest house on a quiet lane, its porch overlooking the Catskills' emerald slopes. The place was small, with creaky floors and a fireplace that smelled of old cedar, but it felt like a palace compared to the sterile penthouse he'd left behind. Serena ran her fingers along the peeling wallpaper, her artist's eye already seeing possibilities. "This could be home," she said, and Vincent's chest tightened with a hope he hadn't dared feel before. They settled in with a hunger for reinvention. Vincent found work at a local music shop, Hudson Harmony, where he taught guitar to kids with wide eyes and clumsy fingers. The shop's owner, a grizzled folk singer named Pete, recognized Vincent's silent but never pride about his past, as if sensing the weight of secrets. Vincent thrived there, his days filled with the twang of strings and the laughter of students who called him Vince without a hint of deference. Serena, meanwhile, opened a tiny design studio in a converted storefront downtown. Her vibrant posters and logos soon adorned local businesses, her art a splash of color in Hudson's quaint streets. She painted late into the night, her canvases capturing the town's soul, its rivers, its people, its quiet defiance of the world's rush. Their new life was a delicate dance of discovery. Vincent and Serena spent evenings on the porch, he strumming soft melodies while she sketched, her pencil scratching in rhythm with his chords. Neighbors began to stop by, drawn by the music that drifted through the open windows. There was Clara, the baker who brought fresh scones, and Jamal, a carpenter who offered to fix their sagging porch steps. These were people who saw Vincent and Serena as neighbors, not as a billionaire and a distraction. One night, Vincent hosted an impromptu concert in their backyard, his Gibson wailing under the stars as townsfolk danced on the grass, their laughter mingling with Serena's. She joined him, swaying to his cover of Die with a Smile, her silk scarf fluttering like a flag of their shared freedom. But the shadow of the Caldwell legacy lingered. Vincent caught himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Margaret's spies to emerge from the pines. He'd cut off contact with his family, but their reach was long, their influence a specter that haunted quiet moments. Serena sensed his unease, her hand finding his during late-night talks. "They can't touch us here," she'd whisper, her voice a balm. "We're building something they'll never understand." Her words steadied him, but he fortified their life with small defenses, using a burner phone, avoiding social media, and keeping their address private. Hudson was their sanctuary, but Vincent knew freedom came at a cost. One afternoon, Serena unveiled a mural on their living room wall, a swirling tapestry of a guitar entwined with wildflowers, its colors bold and unapologetic. "It's us," she said, stepping back to admire it, her hands smudged with paint. Vincent pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "It's perfect," he murmured, seeing their story in every brushstroke, their meeting, their defiance, their love. The mural became a symbol of their new life, a declaration that they were no longer hiding. Vincent began writing a new song, its chords bright and hopeful, inspired by the woman who'd shown him he could be more than a name. As weeks turned to months, Hudson wove them into its fabric. Vincent's students invited them to school recitals, and Serena's designs won a local art contest, earning her a feature in the town paper. They were no longer the billionaire and the artist. They were Vince and Serena, the couple with the cozy house and the open door. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Serena's head on his shoulder, Vincent realized he hadn't thought of Margaret in days. The weight of his past was fading, replaced by the warmth of this life they'd built. He strummed a quiet riff, the notes a promise to Serena, to himself, to the future. They were free, not just from the Caldwells, but for each other, and that was worth every risk they'd taken. The Catskill Mountains cradled Hudson in a golden embrace, their peaks glowing under the late autumn sun as Vincent Caldwell and Serena Jackson sat on their porch, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. 6 months had passed since they'd fled Manhattan's gilded cage. and their small house on the edge of town was now a home, its walls alive with Serena's art and the echo of Vincent's guitar. The porch, once sagging, was now sturdy, thanks to their neighbor Jamal, and it had become their sanctuary, a place where they wove dreams into reality. Tonight the sky was a canvas of coral and violet, and Vincent's fingers danced over his cherry-red Gibson Les Paul, playing a soft rendition of Die with a Smile, the song that had sparked their love. Serena leaned against him, her long, black hair catching the fading light, her warmth a quiet anchor in the cool evening. Their life in Hudson had settled into a rhythm as natural as the river that wound through the town. Vincent's days at Hudson Harmony, the music shop, were filled with the laughter of kids learning chords and the satisfaction of teaching something he loved. Serena's design studio thrived, her vibrant posters now decorating coffee shops and bookstores, each one a testament to her refusal to be dimmed. The town had embraced them, not as outsiders but as kin. Clara, the baker, dropped off apple tarts, and Pete, the shop owner, invited them to jam sessions at his barn. Yet, beneath this peace, Vincent carried a quiet urgency. He wanted to make their love permanent, to declare it in a way that no shadow of his past could touch. The idea had been brewing for weeks, sparked by a moment in Serena's studio when she'd shown him a sketch of them dancing under the stars, her pencil capturing the joy in his eyes. He'd spent nights planning, his heart racing with a mix of nerves and certainty. The ring, a sapphire set in silver shaped like a paintbrush curling around a guitar string, had been custom-made by a local jeweler, a secret he'd kept even from Serena. Tonight he'd chosen a setting as unpretentious as their love, small church in Hudson, where the community gathered for potlucks and recitals. He'd invited their friends, telling Serena it was a town event, his guitar case hiding the ring instead of strings. As they walked to the church, Serena's hand in his, Vincent felt the weight of the moment. The building was modest, its wooden pews worn but warm, fairy lights strung across the rafters by Clara and her kids. The townsfolk filled the seats, their faces glowing with anticipation, though Serena thought they were there for a concert. Vincent led her to the front, his Gibson slung over his shoulder, and faced the crowd. "This isn't just a performance," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "It's a promise." Serena's brow furrowed, her eyes searching his, but he knelt before her, pulling the ring from the guitar case. The crowd gasped, a soft ripple of excitement, and Serena's hand flew to her mouth. "Serena Jackson," Vincent began, his voice raw with emotion. "You saw me when I was invisible, not a name or a legacy, but a man with a song in his heart. You taught me that love isn't a cage, it's freedom. You've been my home, my muse, my reason to fight for what's real." He held up the ring, its sapphire catching the light like her eyes. "I want to spend every day proving I'm worthy, you not because of money or power, but because I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" His words hung in the air, a melody of vulnerability and hope. Serena's eyes glistened, tears spilling as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, Vincent, yes." The church erupted in cheers, neighbors clapping and whistling, as Vincent slid the ring onto her finger, its weight a vow. He stood pulling her into a kiss that tasted of salt and joy, her arms wrapping around him as the crowd's applause faded to a hum. They married the next month in that same church, surrounded by the people who'd become their family. Serena wore a simple gown, its silk a nod to their first meeting, and Vincent in a linen suit played a new song he'd written for her, its chords bright and unbroken. The reception spilled into a nearby warehouse, transformed by Serena's murals into a gallery of their love. Canvases of starry nights, guitar strings, and wildflowers, each one a chapter of their story. As they danced to their wedding song, a slow acoustic cover Vincent played live, Serena whispered, "I still can't believe this is real." He spun her under the fairy lights, his guitar nearby, and murmured, "Believe it, we're real, and nothing can take that away." The Caldwell legacy was a distant echo, its scandals fading as Vincent's new venture, A music school called Harmony Haven took root in Hudson. Margaret had sent one letter, a cold demand to return, but Vincent burned it in their fireplace, Serena's hand on his shoulder. Their life was no longer hers to control. That night, as they lay in their bed, the Catskills a dark silhouette beyond the window, Vincent traced patterns on Serena's skin, his fingers mapping a future they'd build together. Their love had been forged in defiance, tempered by courage, and now it sang. A harmony found in the quiet moments, in the music they made, in the home they'd created. Hudson was their stage, and their love was the song that would echo forever. Thank you for joining us on this electrifying journey through Vincent and Serena's love story in the melody of defiance. What did you think? Did their courage to defy expectations inspire you? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, or tell us where you're listening from. Your feedback fuels our stories, so hit that subscribe button to catch our next tale of passion and rebellion. We can't wait to bring you more heart-pounding adventures. Until then, keep chasing your harmony, and we'll see you in the next chapter.